Good morning, everybody. Aha. The local committee aims to improve outcomes and value for money for residents by strengthening local democracy and improving partnership work within the borough of Waverley. I'm Victoria Young. I'm the chairman of the local committee and the divisional member for Waverley Eastern Villages. Please note that this meeting is being webcast. Thank you all for coming today. Housekeeping, the loos are out through the doors to the side of us. In the event of an emergency, the building must be evacuated. Please exit immediately. The emergency meeting point is on the green adjacent to the car park and the Crown Court car park.
I'm sorry. Could you point the microphone?
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. Let's try that. That better? Okay. So I'll now ask the officers, first of all, to introduce themselves and then the members for the benefit of the public in the gallery. So if we'd start maybe at this end, please.
Good morning, I'm Duncan Knox, Road Safety and Active Travel Team Manager for Surrey County Council.
Good morning, Adrian Selby, Senior Traffic Engineer for the Waverley Highways team.
I'm Frank Apicella, I'm the Area Highway Manager for Guildford and Waverley.
Yvette Ortel, the Community Partnerships Team Officer supporting the committee.
And good morning, I'm Gary Smith, Inspector Gary Smith, Surrey Police, the Waverley Borough Commander.
Thank you. And then if the councillors would introduce themselves, perhaps starting with Mr. Byam.
Thank you. Good morning, Maurice Byam. I'm Waverley Councillor for Bramley, Busbridge and Hascombe.
Carol Coburn, Farnham-Bourne, Waverley Councillor.
Pat Frost, Waverley Councillor, Recklesham and Rowledge.
David Harmer, Waverley Western, County Councillor, Waverley Western Villages, roughly speaking from the edge of Farnham to Brook.
Jerry Hyman, Castle Ward, Farnham, Waverley Councillor.
Dennis Lee, Ward Councillor for Milford within WBC.
Andy McLeod, Surrey Councillor for Farnham Central.
Peter Martin, County Councillor for Godalming South, Milford and Whitley.
Andrew Povey, County Councillor for Cranley and Newhurst.
Wyatt Ramsdale, County Councillor for Farnham South.
Penny Rivers, representing Godalming North at County Council.
Richard Seaborn, Waverley Councillor for Bramley, Busbridge and Hascombe.
Stephen Spence, Surrey County Councillor for Farnham North.
Could you just use your microphone, please?
Usually loud enough. Nick Williams, Godalming, Farncombe and Catchall, Waverley. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. We now have informal public question time, and I'm pleased to welcome questions from members of the public. I understand we have questions from Mr. Hodgson and Mrs. Ames, so I'll take Mr. Hodgson first, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good morning to you. Last meeting, I raised a question on open public forum time, which was given an answer by the Area Highways Manager. However, as it's not subject to debate, I could not resurrect it, but I'm concerned that, in fact, I didn't receive specific answers to the specific points of the question. Sorry, would you like me to repeat the question, Madam Chairman?
Yes, if you could repeat the question, that would be helpful, and then all councillors will know what we're talking about. Yeah, it's on pages 1 and 2 of the agenda. Frank, would you like to answer this question?
Yes, thank you, Graham. I do recall it now. South Hill Footway. We have been, because as you will recall last year, or this year that we're still in, we did give some funding for localism to the parish council, town councils, and we have been speaking to Andy because he has some funding, and we're hoping that with some more money from us, we will be able to utilise his gangs to carry out the works.
If I may, Madam Chairman, sorry, that's an answer to a question I asked about 4 years ago, which I appreciate that work's being carried out. My concern was about the footway at the top of South Hill, which was with the overgrowth and fence falling over the footway. Was that what you were referring to? Sorry.
We haven't been able to contact the landowner, so we will try and do something with that hedge best we can with the town council.
And the other parts of the question, Madam Chairman, please. The checking of the work and the frequency of inspection, please.
In terms of the frequency of the footway inspections, they are carried out, I think because it's a town path, I think either monthly or 6 monthly, off the top of my head. The carriageway, 6 months, yes. I think the carriageway on that section that we're talking about is private, if memory serves me correctly. So that is not inspected, but the footway is inspected and will continue to be inspected and repaired as and when required.
Sorry, Madam Chairman, we are at odds. We're talking about the wrong section of footway here that was raised at the last meeting. The one that the area manager is referring to is the short section from Brighton Road that leads into South Hill. I was referring to the piece of footway at the top of the hill with the fence caving in due to the vegetation overgrowth being untreated and not dealt with, which is what I referred to in my last question time at the previous meeting. Sorry, Frank, that's what I was referring to.
Sorry, Graham, we're trying to deal with both of them in actual fact, if that reassures you.
Great, thank you.
Right, thank you for that. Yvette, I think in view of the fact that this has come back to the committee twice, I think we should put this on the decision tracker for us to monitor so that we can see that this work, that steps are either made to contact the landowner, and if that fails or whatever, I gather that has failed, that the Surrey will do the work. Okay? And we'll check that next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I do have another question, but I will wait until if there is time.
Right, now, Mrs. Ames, your question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mine also is a repeat question. Last time I urged that I was disappointed that this local committee hadn't had the matter of the way forward for the future on your agenda, and urged that it should be so. But in the minuting, it is only put down again as a suggested for a future agenda that the Waverley Local Committee should be looking to moving to a joint committee, as in fact has been the practice I'm discovering largely across the whole of the county. We're rather behind the times here in Waverley. And bearing in mind with the presentation which County Councillor Tim Oliver gave of the way that's going forward with the Health and Wellbeing Board and the Integrated Care Partnerships, I would emphasise, Madam Chairman, the value of these local committees, which are the one area with the public that they do attend if they have matters of interest, that you do, or you can be relied upon to be in public. This committee holds a really crucial situation in the way forward. So once again, I am asking that this time it should be a decision of this committee that there will be a whole review of the local committee, its status and the review and the place it plays in public, as indeed is, again, but unsuggested for a future agenda, on this on page 69, it's still just for information on that is quite clear, and that there will be full publication of everything so that the public can hear the valuable through this for public.
Thank you, because it is meant to be a relatively short question. I've indulged you a little bit. I think I can answer your question. I too share your view that moving towards a joint committee may have many benefits, and certainly is something that the public locally and indeed wider Surrey County Council are looking at. I have discussed it with various people at Waverley and Tim Oliver. I did talk to officers about bringing something to this committee today, but Waverley felt that in view of the elections coming up, they would prefer to deal with it when new arrangements are made after the next election. Mr. Martin.
Madam Chairman, if I could just make a couple of observations. First of all, I think it's unfair to say that we're behind everybody else. Fewer than half of the boroughs and districts have joint committees. So we're not behind, we're very much in line with most, actually. I would like to have a joint committee, so I approve of that approach, but it's wrong to say that we're behind. The second point to make is that actually it's not a decision for this committee. It's a decision for Surrey County Council and Waverley Borough Council to decide on that. So we might perhaps make a recommendation, but the decision makers are not us. Let's be quite clear on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for that helpful clarification. Dr. Povey.
I think it's fair to say that in Guildford, not only do they have a joint committee, but they have what they call a strategic partnership as well. And I just wondered whether that was on your agenda for discussion.
I'm open to discussions on, anything. I don't have any fixed views at this point, and be certainly looking to work with everybody to find the best way forward for Waverley. Mrs. Frost.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll be very brief. We did have a strategic committee, as I recall, some years ago, but it was really more of a talking shop than anything that action came out of. And as a result, we no longer have it.
Yes, quite.
I thank you for that, Mrs. Frost. I do agree that, any change, the new committee or whatever it is, does need to have real powers and funds to do things. Otherwise, as you say, it will just become a talking shop. Mr. Harmer.
Yes, Chairman. I find this an interesting topic because I'm Chairman of the Audit and Governance Committee, as you know. And as you say, this is a matter for Surrey County Council, which has indicated that it would like to see joint committees in general. There are 4 out of 11 at the moment, and 1 or 2 others are thinking about it. But it's rather like dealing with the European Union in a sense, that there are 2 parties. There are 2 parties, and unless the 2 parties, more sensible people, of course, but with 2 parties, you can't dictate, and in a sense, we're a third party in this respect because we're not either Waverley or Surrey County Council. I must say the arrangements that Mrs. Frost described, which was quite a while ago, I had the privilege of sitting on as leader of the council, as leader of Waverley, and in those days it didn't work. But times have changed, and the general mood is that joint committees would be helpful in a whole range of areas. And I think a lot of us would like to see whether the safety partnership come back with some strength to its elbow, or arm, let us say, and strategic partnership too. But or they could all be rolled into one as a joint committee. We shall see.
Thank you. Would you like to say just briefly, Mrs. Ames?
Yes, thank you very much for those interesting comments, Madam Chairman. But may I assure you, because I'm working with them directly, Guildford Borough Council are way ahead in looking at this sort of thing and doing it. And I'm quite clearly of the understanding that everything that has been said is, of course, very valid. And it does mean Waverley is ahead in the work it's doing on the ground itself. In fact, it's leading on the ground, but it's not getting through in the partnerships in the sort of way that is being proposed in Guildford. And if it can be built on the whole range of things in this way, there's plenty of time now before June the 28th, which is our next meeting. But comprehensively, this would be very, very welcome, and I'm delighted to hear it. And thank you for that.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I mean, as many of you will know, the Guildford Joint Committee was only set up 6 months ago, so I don't think we're, drastically behind. We're as previously said, we are in the process, and some committees have gone that way and others haven't. I think that's probably enough on that question. Are there any more public questions? Mr. Hodgson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This one's a bit briefer and more specific. I was interested to see recently the recent remedial works carried out in Wharf Street, Godalming, part of the traffic calming for this town centre. It seems to me, though, although clearly the approach ramp gradients do comply with design guides, they have taken away the previous function, which was to slow the traffic down. And at this particular pinch point in access to the town, which is the only vehicular entrance to the town, the slowing down of the traffic has been removed as a result of these works and this design, which I think clearly is potentially making this point rather less safe for pedestrians. And I don't know if the officers have any comments on this, but I am concerned that the basis of traffic calming seems to have been removed. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Graham. As you know, the previous design was carried out with sets on the approach ramps, and due to the volume of buses predominantly, the sets were completely destroyed, were plucking out, the ramps were seriously deformed. So what we have done is to replace the sets with tarmac. Yep. We have removed some of the blocks that were damaged behind that, so on the flat section of the ramp, but the ramps that have been relaid in hot rolled asphalt are at the same gradient as the previous ones. All we've done is literally create the ramp in tarmac and the remainder of the flat section where the blocks have been removed. So we haven't actually changed the ramp or the gradient how it was previously, other than change the materials.
May I, Madam Chairman? I appreciate it's not a debate, and I do appreciate the response I've had. Thank you very much. But it does seem that removal of the sets, which I fully understand why, has allowed an increase of traffic speeds. The replacement of asphalt has seems to me to have allowed that from what I've seen. But thank you for the response. I can say no more.
Thank you for that. We note your comments. I'm sure that officers, when they're out observing, will, follow that up. But, we have to take our experts' view on this matter. Are there any more public questions? Okay. Thank you to the people who've come and asked questions in here today. If you would like an answer written, please leave your contact details with the committee officer. You're obviously welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you wish to do so. I'll now continue with the agenda of the formal local committee. First of all, item 1, apologies for absence. We've had apologies from Councillor Liz Townsend. I don't think there are any others, are there? Item 2, minutes for approval. Please can members agree that the minutes from the 14th of December are accurate? Agree. Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Please could members declare any disclosable pecuniary interests in respect of any item to be considered at this meeting? Okay, I take it there are none. Thank you. Item 4, Chairman's announcements. I've one or two things to mention today. First of all, to county councillors, the members' community allocation funding will be available again from the 1st of April. Each county councillor has £5,000 to spend on non-highways projects, and that the normal regime of the committee officers will be dealing with that. Secondly, I'd like to bring to your attention the public consultation on Surrey's Fire and Rescue Service, which started on the 4th of March and ends on the 26th of May. The consultation will be seeking views on Surrey Fire and Rescue Services draft Making Surrey Safer plan, which outlines the proposals for 2020 to 2023, and you can find full details on the Surrey County Council website. Yvette can give you the link if you need it, but I recommend Google to find it. That I think is all I have to say. So we now move on to petitions, and we've received one petition. Mr. Osborne, thank you for coming. You now have 3 minutes to speak on your petition.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I presume all of you have seen the video and have got the handout with the maps and everything in front of you, so I'll be brief. We're talking about Markwick Lane to Station Lane, 7 miles long. The issue is twofold: recent increases in traffic volume and HGVs using this route. There are numerous places where on this route there are tailbacks, log jams, and where lorries create an impasse. It's dangerous. The narrow roads have been eroded with banks and are full of potholes, causing vehicles to drive in the middle to avoid them. Additionally, we've got HGVs that force oncoming traffic to move into the banks and potholes. Many residents report damage to cars. Yes, there is little we can do about addressing volume, but I do want the authorities to acknowledge that the problem of cumulative impact of traffic with so many new developments that are rubber stamped by highways without any appropriate infrastructure to deal with it. Markwick Lane to Station Lane will see the brunt of the 3,500 houses being built or proposed in the Cranley area, and new residents won't have access to the viable public transport, so most will commute by car. So that's 8 miles to their nearest station at Milford or to the A3. So this will be their shortest route, and it will double the number of cars on Salt Lane. Likewise at Milford, heading to the A3, Station Lane is close to capacity at junctions, and I can see an extra 16% added if Milford Golf Course is developed, and a further 7% if Cranley Tip is closed. Our up-to-date data shows that commercial vehicles have increased by 28% in the last 9 months. That's significant. Largely construction traffic heading east in the morning, west in the evening, a clear indicator of what commuter traffic will follow in the future. HGVs are a problem, and the logs and the photos that you see are a good illustration of that. They should be on the A roads, but on the rural rat runs, they are too big, they break up the surface, they hit the trees, and they cause structural damage. If I could address the highways officer's response, he doesn't address Station Lane at all, and he doesn't mention the Lord initiative. I've put in a number of forms, we've had no response in a year for those. Does Lord work? Secondly, the officer is uncertain how many are HGVs in his 2017 survey and assumes there may be local deliveries. My data is from 2018 and 2019 based on 24-hour video surveys and 10 months of logging, so I can differentiate between HGVs and local deliveries. The photos you see are clearly not HGVs destined for the domestic sites on Markwick Lane. In fact, I've called hauliers who have confirmed the destinations of some of those trucks. Advisory signs currently are a weak deterrent as they are ignored by drivers quoting the local deliveries excuse, whereas a 7.5-ton restriction is a very strong deterrent. The officer assumes construction traffic is dissuaded from rat runs by borough-applied conditions on developers. Clearly, these are not being applied and they are not being enforced. Again, photographs confirm. The officer says a 7.5-ton restriction would push HGVs to other rural routes. I disagree. I can give you examples. The highways officer has not spoken specifically of Station Lane and of Lord. I mentioned that. So we need 5 things: a dialogue with highways, 7.5-ton restriction, if viable, action rather than lip service on Lord initiative, and a proper consideration of the cumulative traffic volumes when considering large developments that will use this route.
Thank you very much. Frank, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you for your petition. We have many similar roads to this in the Surrey Hills area. They're all narrow lanes. I can think of several in both the Guildford and the Waverley areas. We have the same problem, narrow lanes that are not suitable for these types of vehicles. Looking at the figures you have provided, it does show that in terms of the numbers of HGVs, they are and remain quite low in comparison to LGVs and cars. And I think there's a good reason for that, is because of the type of lane that they are. Most of the deliveries looking at this are being carried out by way of LGV rather than HGV. I used to drive HGV. I know that I would like to stay on an A road. The last thing I want to do is come off an A road and get stuck on a country lane. The only reason I would come off the A road and go onto a country lane is because I have to do local deliveries. That doesn't necessarily mean it's in that road, or that it is in that, it could be in that area, but the problem we face as a highway authority is that roads are for passing and repassing. So our responsibility under the Highways Act is to ensure that we provide for that road for passing and repassing. So we do sign them, as we have done with blue and white advisory signs that state that they are unsuitable for HGV traffic. At the end of the day, we can also, with the blessing of this committee and the police, put in weight restrictions, such as 7.5 ton weight restrictions. They rely wholly upon the police to enforce them. We have no enforcement powers whatsoever. So we rely wholly on the police to enforce them. And no doubt that the police will tell you, and we've got officers here today, they will no doubt tell you that the only way that they can enforce such a restriction is to follow each and every vehicle through to ensure that they have or have not stopped in the area for legitimate business. You also mentioned the cumulative effects and how highways are rubber stamping these developments. Believe it or not, Highways or Surrey County Council are merely a statutory consultee to a lot of these planning applications that go in. The Borough Council are the planning authority, so we will be consulted upon those, and we provide whatever evidence or comments that we can based upon each different location and the area, and a statutory consultation is carried out, and the outcome of that isn't always what everyone wants, but it is what it is. We, from a highway perspective, do suffer with some of the applications and some of the remnants of what is approved. However, we don't always have the funding available to either rectify it or provide a permanent resolution to it. You mentioned that it is a rat run and it is used by traffic, and maybe it is the shortest route. I would argue it's not necessarily the quickest or the easiest. You mentioned the Lord Initiative. I have sent emails to the team who look after the Lord Initiative, because I don't feel that at the moment the policy is really producing anything other than just a database of records from residents in terms of when, what, how, and not too much is being done other than inform the hauliers and maybe the sat-nav providers regarding these routes. So I think that there is some work that needs to be done on the Lord Initiative. And I think I've just about covered everything on my notes that I wanted to say, so yes, thank you.
Am I permitted to reply?
I certainly will let you come back, but I think I'll just open it up to the floor if anybody here would like to speak, because I know a number of councillors, I mean, I obviously represent the exact area, but another number of people are adjacent and or have similar situations in their own patch. So, who I can see Mr. Seaborn signalling. Mr. Seaborn, first of all.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have every sympathy with the petitioners. The short YouTube presentation eloquently demonstrated the situation in Markwick Lane. I drive down that road from time to time and find it a most uncomfortable experience. Indeed, I drove down it on Tuesday to remind myself just how uncomfortable it is, and I wasn't disappointed. It wasn't long before I ground to a halt on one of the single lane stretches with a car facing me and a car behind me so that I couldn't manoeuvre. So with that in mind, I really wonder whether the petition has entirely formulated the right question. HGVs certainly cause the worst of the problems in Martwick Lane, and indeed many of the other narrow roads, as has been pointed out. You know, the Surrey Hills is full of examples like this. But the real issue to me seems to be two-way traffic going down single-lane roads, and that was certainly the issue I had on Tuesday. Clearly, we can't turn these narrow lanes into conventional one-way roads. And if we look at each problem road in isolation, there's not really the justification to invest in the effort to come up with more modern technology-based solutions. But I'd be really interested to know if anyone in Surrey is actually looking forward rather than worrying about the current situation where we clearly don't have the toolbox to solve these problems. Technology is advancing at a huge rate. Sensors, artificial intelligence, better batteries and solar power to power traffic lights that couldn't be easily fitted in because there's no electrical source. All those things are improving at a rate of knots. And I really would be very interested if anyone in Surrey is actually giving thought to the future rather than trying to come up with solutions based on the now. So to me, it would actually be really good if we could have the portfolio holder for highways from Surrey County Council in front of this committee at the earliest opportunity to tell us if there's any positive thinking towards the future rather than just accepting that we don't have a toolbox at the moment that can solve these problems, which are very real and will get worse as have been correctly identified. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much for that. Dr. Povey.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I also have a lot of sympathy with the petitioner. I think that we're not taking the issue seriously enough within the County Council, and I very much endorse what Councillor Seaborn has just said, actually. So I was going to suggest that we ought to have it as an agenda item here in terms of looking at the problem on a slightly wider scale, and if that could involve bringing the Cabinet Member Highways here, then I think that would be very helpful. Probably need Transport Development Control as well, perhaps, so that we could actually have a proper discussion and see if there are things that we can do, not just on this road, but on a wider basis. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Osborne for all the work that he has put into producing the video, which really does sum up and very clearly explain to every one of us not only our personal experience, but just how bad things are. And so therefore, unfortunately, the response from the platform was highly disappointing. I've stopped using Martwick Lane. In fact, I did many months ago because I'm just not prepared to put the car through the possibility of damage or further damaging the banking and things like that. And this is happening elsewhere in the county. And at the moment, we do not appear to have any rational solution or approach to it, but we have to find something to improve things. And Councillor Seaborn has made a very good suggestion there, which I think is absolutely essential to follow through, because I believe that our conditions on the roads are producing really serious tensions in our society, and unless we can sort of pick up on something that makes noticeable improvement, things do not look too good for the future. And there is clearly a disconnect between our personal experiences on the roads and the decisions by the statutory authorities that our planning committees have to contend with. Those are my observations. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, I think you wanted to speak.
Thank you. Yes, and I too have lots of sympathy with the petition, and indeed a part of the road does come into my division. Station Lane, Milford is part of my division, and I've been very concerned about HGV movements on that road for a very long time. Indeed, I commissioned or got commissioned the freight study which was done a couple of years ago. I think for me there are two issues here. Firstly, enforcement, and the second one is displacement. Enforcement is very difficult, and I've found that, for instance, I'm again mentioned here of getting the weight restrictions and the HGV changes on Primrose Ridge, which is that very steep road which goes up from the Portsmouth Road as you come towards Godalming from the south. It has improved things, but it's very difficult to enforce, that is a continuing issue. And the longer the stretch of road, the more difficult the enforcement, I think. Interesting to perhaps hear Inspector Smith's observations on that. The second one is displacement. I have a great deal of sympathy with traffic in that road, but of course if you take it out, where does it go? And for me, in my division, it goes up the Cranley to Godalming Road and turns left and goes down through Holloway, through Home Farm, and tries to go to shut down Shackstead Lane or Holloway, which is equally dreadful from the point of view of HGV traffic. So if we were to take a decision on this particular road, then I would want it on a wider basis in order not only to consider the traffic that's there, but where the traffic might go to and the impact elsewhere. Thank you.
Mr. Harmer.
Yes, Madam Chairman, I think we do need to have a wider look. And the problem we have is that the geography of most of Waverley is that all roads point to Guildford radially, and there are some north-south or northeast-southwest roads, but the problems that I face, certainly, and I think this is another example in a different division, or divisions, plural, is the east-west links. There's a whole series of east-west links that are potentially problematic, and I think we need to have a good look. And it's the biggest issue in my mind, and has been all along, with the Dunsfold Park development. And add on to that the considerable increase in Cranley development, and where's it going to go? You know, it can't all go on the 281, it won't fit. You know, and then it tries to go east-west to get around the problem, and we just don't have the roads to deal with it. So I think we need to have a fundamental look at our geography and how we're going to try to manage the road system in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Byers, you're waiting very patiently.
Thank you. Well, so much has been said. It's not much really to say, except I was very, very impressed by the video that we were given. I opened it up and thought, well, this will be something of nothing, perhaps. I'm being disingenuous there, but in fact it was wonderful. It told the story extremely well. I've represented most of that area for many, many years. I think it's probably about 15 years since I took over Busbridge and Hascombe, and that road has caused concern all the way through, and it just continues to get worse. The one point that hasn't been mentioned by anybody else is the point about the possible closing of the CRC at Cranley, and therefore that the vehicles are likely to want to take that route because it is the quickest way to get from Cranley area and Dunsfold to the CRC. I don't know that a decision has yet been made with the CRC, but I hope that in fact we don't go that route through and close that down.
Thank you very much. Mr. Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman. The petition is asking for a 7.5 tonne HGV restriction, and I think it is a very sensible solution to take away some of the problems in that area, and I support this petition. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, as we do have Inspector Smith here, we might take the opportunity, if you don't mind, to ask for his views on 7.5 tonne restrictions, and or if he's going to tell us that that's not the answer, what could be a solution? Like Mrs. Thatcher, I want solutions, not problems. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this side of things. Ultimately, I'll echo the comments that have been made already in that this has got to be a joined-up approach. We can't just look at the one road on its own. As a local resident, I'll echo what Mr. Martin has said in that you cannot just resolve or look at this road in isolation. As has been said as well, enforcement side of things. It is a reality. There are only a limited number of officers who can deal with traffic issues and such like. We are looking at increasing them. However, they will always be focused where the biggest issues are, and that's reducing road death and such like. That is not to belittle this side of things. I use the road regularly. I know what a problem it can be. But we also have to have a slight awareness of, if we're going to put restrictions in, are we going to be able to enforce them? At the moment, I would suggest that whilst we will do our best, it wouldn't necessarily be top of the list of priorities for Surrey Police traffic enforcement. With regards to that magic wand of what we can do, I'm afraid I haven't got one.
Thank you all very much for your contributions to this. As I say, the road is, most of it is in my division, and I echo what many people have already said. My concern remains that while we could introduce a 7.5 tonne weight limit potentially, if it's not going to be enforced, are we actually going to move any further forward? And is it then, sensible to spend money putting in a ban that's not going to actually yield any results? However, I am keen that we do think about this some more, because it is a very real problem across my division and all the rural parts of Waverley. And I am very much minded that we should bring an item to this committee, perhaps at the next meeting, with the transport experts and the Cabinet Member for Highways to look at this in a more holistic manner, if members would be agreeable with that. Great. Mr. Osborne, would you like to say your piece?
If I could touch on what Inspector Smith was talking about enforcement, because currently the blue signs, which are advisory, they're not enforced either. So actually we're not looking for enforcement, we're looking for deterrent. Now the blue signs are a very low deterrent because anybody can get by them by saying I'm going locally, and we can't really prove that unless we interrogate. I have, and I found out that quite a few of them aren't local deliveries. So that's addressing what Mr. Apicella mentioned. And so really the enforcement isn't the reason not to do 7.5. Red signs do deter, and so I could imagine that making a big difference to the number of HGVs and big LGVs. Secondly, if we have construction management, traffic management plans agreed with all these big developers, and most notably with Dunsfold, then that's going to take a huge amount off anyway. But that needs to be strong, and they need to have teeth. And so if we have a 7.5 tonne, then it's clear they're going to have to be breaking that, as well as their Waverley Borough traffic management agreement with all the developers. So that will take an awful lot of it. And if you look at the photographs, you can see those are not local deliveries. Those are all going to Dunsfold Park, the biodigester. They're going to oil tankers. There's an oil terminal at Dunsfold Park. And then we've got the aggregate trucks. Well, they're not local deliveries. They're going to Horsham, Cranley, Alfold. If I could mention something that the Highways officer mentioned, which was about Lord, and what was the point? My question is, what is the point of Lord? Currently, you say you're assessing it by keeping the data, but why have a Lord initiative if you're not going to do anything with it? I submitted 5 last year. Nothing's happened about them. I achieve more by ringing up the hauliers than you do. And in fact, the Lord initiative is on the Surrey County website currently. You fill in the form and you send it to the email address at the bottom. The email address at the bottom is Peter Hitchens. He left Surrey County over a year ago. So that's not really a joined up way of doing things. So it sounds like Lord is on the back burner. And really, if there was one road that qualifies for Lord attention, it's this road. The CRC, yes, I'm as concerned as the councillors about that. Councillor Martin, I agree. Enforcement is a concern, but as I've said, I think it's the deterrent factor that's key. Displacement, I understand, but these should be on the A roads. That's what the A roads are for. That's what a strategic building of trunk roads and A roads is for. It's just unfortunate that Cranley is one of the 4 towns, and it's the only one that doesn't have any infrastructure. So that's why Salt Lane, Markwick Lane and Station Lane are getting the dirty end of that stick, because they're the main east-west route.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you, I think, on behalf of everybody, on all the work you've put into your petition and that video, which was one of the most, was extremely enlightening and showed it very clearly, better than words really can. Now, in terms of recommendation, on your agenda at page 17 on the paper copy, you'll see that the local committee is asked to note the officer comments and to consider the merits of such a proposal for inclusion in the 2019-20 Highways Works programme. Yes, Mr.
Might
Martin.
we add a recommendation that the Highways portfolio holder comes to a future meeting, that we can, as members have suggested, we could have this discussion with him?
Indeed. Would you like to propose that, Mr. Martin?
I add a third point then, that we propose that we should bring the portfolio holder for Highways to a future meeting for us to interrogate him.
The next meeting. Yeah. Well, yeah, as soon as reasonably possible. Yeah. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you very much. Is that... Have I done what I'm supposed to?
So, yeah, can I just clarify, the new recommendation is to invite the Surrey County Council
portfolio holder for highways to the next meeting to discuss rural roads.
And do members agree the two recommendations there?
Are the recommendations agreed, the other numbers 1 and 2? Oh, hang on, 1 second. All right, Dr. Povey.
Well, I just think the recommendation 2, I mean, we have considered the merits, and I think some of us would like to see that proposal go forward for inclusion in the 2019-20 programme, and I think that maybe has to be put to a vote. Because I think at the moment that recommendation is nothing. It just says consider the merits. Well, we have done to some extent. We can consider them again, but it seems to me that we should actually put the proposal to the test.
Dr. Povey, I do understand what you are saying. Of course, there's a further sort of complication to that, which is that if we agree to spend money on this thing, we're agreeing to not spend money on some other project. I'm not saying that this isn't a worthy thing, and this is indeed in my own division.
It would come out of your allocation, yeah.
So you'd like to vote to spend my money? Mr. Harmer.
Not Dr. Harmer, he's in Devon. I would not wish to vote for this, at least until I had the portfolio holder talk with us. And the reason is that I have had several propositions turned down on the grounds that we don't want to do anything which is not going to get itself enforced, because that brings the whole of our regime into disrepute. Drivers know what they can get away with, and in fact the loss of local policemen, no, not PCSOs, no, we used to have cops who did 4 or 5 villages. And in those days, people were very cautious about what they did because they tended to get caught by those cops. But if we're told that it's not going to be, it's very unlikely that it's going to be enforced, then I would absolutely vote against it, because I do agree with that proposition that it brings the whole system into disrepute and causes big problems with that. And by the way, I wouldn't be in favour of having a one-way system for the rural roads, because they'll all drive at 70 if you do that. So I think we have to think through what we're going to do and get it right, rather than just jumping into this. I think Paul would probably agree with that. Yeah.
Mrs. Frost.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Chairman. We seem to be going round in ever-decreasing circles. I think we're all very sympathetic with the petitioner and what they're trying to do. But the more we talk about this, the more this is a much bigger problem everywhere. And I think we ought to have the Cabinet member here to talk to us, so that we can actually understand, and he can understand exactly what it is we're trying to do. And we've all got these roads in our divisions and indeed in our wards. So therefore, I would like to propose that we do change the recommendations, but could we make them simple but all-encompassing?
Thank you. Mr. Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman. We're here to vote on this petition, and we have discussed it. We're not talking about enforcement. You know, you can go around the whole borough and see things not enforced. And we've still got double yellow lines. They park on pavements. They go down one-way streets. It's never enforced. So to use that as a reason to turn this down is very loosely considered, I think. I really do feel this is a deterrent and that we should vote for it to be installed. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I understand the strength of feeling, but I do think that we need to look at the full picture and wait for the portfolio holder at least before we make any decisions. That's only another 3 months or so probably before he comes. You know, we're not going to solve this overnight. I'll take Mr. Ramsdale and Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Chairman. Indeed, you've largely encapsulated with your last couple of sentences what I was going to try and say, which is, as somebody who's a bit independent from this, because it's not in my particular area, I feel I'm being asked to make a definite decision now, but actually, certainly the suggestions to get the portfolio holder involved would give us a lot better basis of decision. So if we could formally defer the decision on that so that it's still there on the table. I don't want to lose it, but I'm certainly not prepared today to say, yeah, stick up the red signs because of the disadvantages. So if we can do that on a formal deferment, that's where I'd like to be, please.
Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I endorse the comments that you make. It would be entirely wrong to make the decision here and now, however desirable it might be, because we have to consider not only this application, but all the other things that we want to do. There is a whole page of worthy things that we need to do, each of which cost a considerable sum. So we should not simply be taking this in isolation and say, gosh, let's do that, because that simply bumps everything else down the rest. It needs to be, I think the wording is completely right. We're prepared to look at it for 1920 and consider it versus all the other things that we need to do. It's not that we're out of sympathy with this, but that would be an entirely wrong thing to do right now, in my view.
Thank you. Well, in that view, I would like to have the recommendations. Number 1, to note the officer comments. Number 2, to consider the merits of such a proposal for inclusion in the 1920 Highways programme. And number 3, to invite the SCC portfolio holder for highways to attend the Waverley Local Committee at the first available opportunity to discuss the issue of rat runs on rural roads. Is that agreed? Thank you. Mr. Osborne, we will let you know how that goes, and obviously, assuming the portfolio can come at the next meeting, we will invite you to come when indeed he does come. Thank you.
Chairman, I wonder if I could just make a constitutional comment for the benefit of the public. The desirability of having the portfolio holder here is that even if we voted for this now, he could cause it to be scratched if he believed that it was contrary to the wider benefits. So it's much better to get hold of the portfolio holder with a difficult situation like this, and let's thrash it out with him so that we have his support when it has to be signed off. So, you know, that's happened to us in the past, mainly on speed limits actually. We've had them scratched out because it didn't fit in with the overall picture. So I think we should do that for that reason. I think people should understand that.
Thank you all very much for your contributions on this difficult topic. Moving on now to written public questions. We've had 6 public questions. And the answers are available on the green sheets. First of all, we have a question from Councillor David Beeman. Would you like to... there you are. Would you like to ask a supplementary question on each of your 2 questions?
I'll do it. Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, well, apart from the fact that I'm a bit puzzled why a zebra crossing costs less than half of a pelican crossing, which seems rather strange to me, but there we are. Do we really, the population of this area is changed because of the opening of Hawthorne Lodge, and we have a lot of elderly people. Do we really have to wait for an accident to happen in this area before taking action? Is it possible to undertake some sort of risk analysis on this before, rather than waiting for an accident to happen? That's my question on the first one. And perhaps I can have an answer to that before.
Yeah, we'll answer that question, and before we move on to the second one, I think the whole question of this location in Farnham is all tied up with the whole of the possible pedestrianisation, traffic reorganisation of Farnham, and I think the Highways team will echo that we're very reluctant to start doing odd piecemeal bits of work, that we need to look at the whole question as a whole, so that we don't make any sort of short-term mistakes, if you like, that things that are not going to fit in with the, the greater master plan, for want of a better description. Mr. Apicella, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I completely echo that. The area is being subject to a lot of redevelopment, a lot of changes, a lot of proposals, and I think we would not want to waste money in areas where we introduce something now that we may have to remove in the future.
Mrs. Frost, is it in your patch? Would you like to say anything? Moss.
To say something, if I may, Madam Chairman. When the home was built there, the residential home was built on the corner in the place of the old police station, it was intended there should be a crossing there. This was part of it, and this was something which I was working on with Highways, and they put a crossing in, but it was not the one that was intended. So the one that went in, which was just by the bridge, by Longbridge, is a bit far away from the home that's there, the residential home. But we ran out of money, and there was supposed to have been some money from the developers to have, in fact, finished off the crossing at that point. And I think members of this committee will remember that, because it was on the programme. So what's happened to that now, I don't know. I certainly agree that we should wait until we've got the whole done, and it is a point that in fact there is a crossing intended between Union Road and Longbridge, and that's part of the development monies from Brightwalls Yard development, and that was there. That's always been there, but I think it's a question of getting on with something, and I know that there is a programme where we're actually going to be getting on with something to do with the development of Farnham, traffic-wise, involving Surrey County Council, Waverley Council and the Town Council. I know that is now on the cards. It was passed by Waverley at their council meeting last Tuesday. But certainly there was an intention to put a proper crossing there for people to get from Gostry Meadow, where a lot of activity goes on now, and indeed to Maltings. Thank you.
Thank you. I see two people indicating I'm happy to take you two, but we're going to be here all afternoon at the rate we're going. So if you would be quick, Mr. Hyman.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Councillor Frost quite right that it was part of the Hawthorne Lodge scheme, and that changed slightly. Now, we also had the F-Camp from Farnham Conservation Area Management Plan, which Councillor Coburn knows more about, I'm sure, but the original F-Camp had in their shared space scheme on the section as you come around the corner from Union Road into Longbridge. And, of course, we also have the, as Councillor Frost has said, the East Street scheme proposing a sort of three-way traffic lights at the junction with Union Road, Longbridge and Downing Street. So I disagree with Councillor Frost on let's just do something and get something in there. We have to work out what is the best thing to do and the right thing out of all the different things that have been provided, and I'm very glad that we haven't leapt into doing the wrong thing, as Frank Apicella says. We've got to get this right. We've got to knock some heads together, probably, amongst developers and Highways team. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. MacLeod.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick point that in Frank's answer, he does refer to this crossing that's coming along in Downing Street and Union Road. That's pretty close to the area where the suggestion of this additional crossing. So can we have any idea when that is likely to happen, Frank? Have you any idea when that crossing will come along?
Having spoken to the developer, I think it would be towards the tail end of the development, purely because anything we do there now would prevent some of their larger deliveries that they've got arriving at the site. So to ensure that, again, we don't carry out any abortive work, it will be at the tail end of the development.
Thank you very much. Right. Mr. Beeman, would you now like to ask a supplementary to your second question?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Chair. Yes. First of all, let's be quite clear about this. It's not a new service. What Farnham gains, Frimley, Bagshot and Camberley lose. So let's be quite clear about it. I know there's nothing Waverley, but if we're looking at transport, we ought to look at this in a wider context. Anyway, we have what we have, as I say, and we're going to have this level crossing and now we have this meeting. Could I ask whether there will be any local representatives at this meeting involving Network Rail and South Western Railway? Since to date, it appears that local views have not been taken into account.
I'm afraid Mr. Millen is not here today and he'll be the person who would know about this. We'll give you a written response to that after the meeting and we'll circulate it to members if they are interested. Mr. MacLeod.
Thank you, Chairman. I live very close to this level crossing, so I'm regularly held up by the trains. The point I would make, actually, that South West Railway are quite entitled to do this. It was part of their bid to take over the franchise. But the thing that concerns me about it is that 2 trains an hour is probably a good idea in rush hour, in the morning and evening rush hour. But during the day, the trains to London that you see going through this junction are regularly pretty empty. So to have 2 trains an hour going between Farnham and Guildford during the whole day just seems to me to be over the top. It seems to me that 1 train an hour during the bulk of the day would be fine, with 2 trains an hour at the rush hour, morning and evening. And I'll take that point up separately.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think we can quite get into the debates of the train timetable here, but note your comments. Thank you. Then we've had a question from Councillor Andrew Bolton. Would you like to ask a supplementary?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for the assurance given in the answer. However, I note that under the road under the bridge, the Charterhouse Bridge, will be closed on the 1st to the 5th of April. And I trust appropriate measures will be in place for all the light, heavy traffic. Thank you. Light and heavy.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Yes, the Charterhouse School, I believe, are carrying out repairs to the bridge and doing a survey on the condition. The necessary diversions will be in place, which will obviously be New Pond Road, as the HGVs should be going under anyway, and all traffic, in fact. However, it is likely that local traffic will use their knowledge and probably use Farncombe, etc., as a form of smaller diversion, which is unavoidable, unfortunately. It's not mandatory to follow a diversion.
Right, now we move to question 4 from Mr. Stuart Edge on page 3 of the green sheet. Mr. Edge, would you like to ask a supplementary?
Yes, please. Yeah. Thanks for the answers. The answer is encouraging, and I might address my concerns.
Could Mr. Edge pull his microphone up so we can
that might be better. Sorry. Thank you for the answer. Encouraging and might address my concerns. But that does depend on what in Section A you have in mind as an assessment, because I could imagine that could be extremely brief. Could you assure me that this assessment will include the suggestions in the petition as requested, and that the assessment will be carried out with the same sort of thoroughness that was used in the earlier suggestion of a mini roundabout at the junction, which I thought was a fair assessment? Thank you.
I presume from that you're talking that you want the assessment to take into account your request for a mini roundabout at that junction.
No. There was a previous petition which requested that, and that was very adequately dealt with in a previous item.
Yep.
The petition I put forward, which was declined, specifically asked for other types of changes, such as traffic lights and pedestrian crossings. And what I'm looking for is an assessment which includes that in scope. And then the scope should be carried out to the extent that was carried out for the mini roundabout.
I suspect that, the whole of Farnham will be looked at in the round by the transport planners. But however, I'm not in a position to give you a categoric assurance on it because it's, beyond the realm of my control or indeed my knowledge. But, as you know, there is a great deal of work going on to the town centre of Farnham, and obviously that this will be looked at with it. And I think the fact that you've raised this matter and this junction on several occasions certainly means that this junction is on everybody's radar.
So can I just ask if the officers have anything to add to that?
These officers didn't actually do the response on this. It was Richard Cooper, who is not with us this morning. Mr. Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, one of my problems, difficulty with this, and if you look at the response in Part B, it says it's important the town centres looked as a whole. Individual junctions are not considered separately. There needs to be a holistic approach. This was, according to Surrey County Council and Richard Cooper, who answered this, came along to the meetings when the Hopfields was being put through the planning committee a couple of years ago, 4 years ago now, actually, nearly. And we were told at the time that that junction had been modelled, wasn't going to be a problem with it. It had been modelled in the Farnham model that was built for the East Street scheme. Now, that I have been asking for many, many years to show us that model, because I know full well that the East Street modelling actually never reflected or included what was actually proposed for the Royal Deer Junction. So none of the answers that we're getting, all of the stuff that's been coming to us for the past 10 years has been on a false assumption that modelling was done properly by Crest when it wasn't done so. So, and again, it's on page 11 of our minutes. I ask every meeting, I try and get some progress. I try and get to see this modelling so that I can prove to everyone that it hasn't actually been modelled properly, that Crest falsified it all those years ago. It's still ongoing. We've got to sort this out because we're looking at the whole issue of Farnham's roads from a number of different directions, air quality and place shaping, and also from Mr. Edge's question here in respect of Hopfields and other developments. Whenabouts are we ever going to be able to get to see this modelling that supposedly exists, that backs up all the decisions that are being made? Because, in my view, most of the decisions that have been made over the past 10 years have been incorrect because they are based on false assumptions, and we really need to move on, Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Hyman, thank you for your views on that.
But I have asked a number of times if you could get that modelling for us, and we've had absolutely no, to make some progress on.
I don't think this modelling is within my remit. As the answer says, there's a lot of new work going on, and that is going to have, ample sort of. The residents of Farnham and different bodies related to Farnham will obviously have opportunities to comment on it as and when it develops a little bit more. Mr. Harmer.
I think members should bear in mind, and the public should appreciate, or perhaps I can help them to appreciate, this is not a highways matter. Mr. Cooper doesn't work for the Highways Department. This is a planner who happens to specialise in the highways aspects of planning. And so it isn't within our remit, you're quite right, all of our remit, not just yours. But that doesn't mean to say that it wouldn't be desirable to find out whether this thing exists or not. And I wonder if we could, if perhaps you could approach the whoever, the leader of the council, if it has to go that high, to see if that can be established, because I think that would be helpful and help to assuage concerns one way or another. I mean, it might stoke them up, who knows. but at least if such a thing does exist, I think we're entitled to know that. But the critical thing is that it isn't within the remit of this committee to consider, because it's a planning matter, not a highways matter. And that's
every decision we make comes from
Well, that's true, because they're planning issues.
Thank you. Mrs Frost.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. If it is helpful, the modelling does exist because I was involved in getting it done. And in fact, it was done by Surrey County Council, not Crest Nicholson. It came before the Farnham Traffic Task Group some years ago when I was still chairman of this committee. And in actual fact, we have confirmed on a number of occasions to Councillor Hyman that the Royal Deer Junction was modelled and was part of that. Where that modelling is, I have no idea, but I'm sure our highways people sitting next to you will be aware of it. But it has been done. It was done by Surrey County Council and it was seen by the Farnham Traffic Task Group.
Thank you for that helpful clarification. I will ask my colleagues on my left about this modelling, and I'm sure that that can then be shared. Thank you. Moving on now, we have question 5, a joint question from Andrew Bolton and Paul Follows. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Chair. First off, can I just roughly understand when the parking engineer is scheduled to be next in the area? I appreciate with each local committee several months pass in between, so we'd just like some clarity on that. I'd also just like to take the advantage in the presence of Inspector Smith, who's here today, to just note that the roads we're talking about in question are at the new Oxford Ridge Site D. And I just wanted to flag, if it hasn't already been flagged to you before, that the new bus stop there has been essentially vandalised very seriously, and those residents very near to that site around it in the new builds are very concerned about the levels of antisocial behaviour. So I just wanted to take that opportunity too. Thank you.
Do you have any knowledge of the parking engineer's movements? We don't know the answer, but we will find out and we'll let you have a written response. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr Martin.
Could I just add that on that damaged shelter, I have reported it. It is in fact a Waverley construction, not a Surrey County Council one. It is to be repaired by Waverley, hopefully fairly soon.
And lastly, Councillor Paul Follows has another question of his own. And would you like a supplementary to that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If the committee would just indulge me for a moment, just so I've understood the response. The Wharf Children's Centre is providing many popular and well-used services in Godalming that are being accessed by a wide range of the community, but we're effectively targeting a different group of vulnerable people that really, really need the services but are not already clients. And to do that, we're ripping up the whole thing and signposting residents to a diminishing number of other services within the town or the borough that may or may not exist or have funding to actually do the job. My specific question, though, I've spoken to a number of parents again this morning and yesterday, and many of them still feel extremely in the dark about what the changes are, when they come into effect and what they actually mean. So my plea here is that Surrey redouble its efforts to communicate changes directly with the parents and also again with the Children's Centre itself. And we'll just ask you if you would commit to doing that in the next few days, please. Thank you.
I'll certainly undertake that we will check with the team dealing with children's centres to make sure that they are in touch and that as much information as possible is shared with the users of the service and the providers. Thank you. Right. Item 7, written members' questions. No questions have been received. So we now move on to an overview of policing in Waverley for information. I'm pleased to welcome Borough Commander Inspector Gary Smith, and I'll hand over to you now.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. I have included a report of crime figures, statistics and such like, which I believe everybody has had the opportunity to review. I've been in post in Waverley as the Borough Commander for the last year, and in that time we have seen several changes. In the year coming forward, we're going to see some more. I'll start this side of things by saying there is more that the police can do in partnership and alone, and we are moving towards doing so. Those of you with a keen eye will look at the statistics and see that reported crime in Waverley has gone up. Okay, if you look at the exact figures, I believe for the financial year to date at the end of February, reported crime had gone up by 528 offences, which equates to approximately 11% in our recording. That's not a statistic I like, to be totally honest. However, it is in line with what we've seen nationally. To put it into context, overall, there are just over 5,000 crimes reported within Waverley. Waverley is the largest geographical policing borough and the fourth most populous. Our statistics here show that we have the least number of crimes reported anywhere within Surrey as a borough, and that is one thing that I am proud of. Some of the increase in reporting will be because I have directed my team towards the mantra of go and tell people to tell us what's happening. I've heard on many an occasion people's apathy towards reporting crime because they don't necessarily feel that the police and partner agencies will deal with it. It is a reality of modern day policing that there are only a finite number of officers, and my ambition is to direct those to where they can have the biggest impact. So by going out and asking people, tell us what's going on in your area, and I'm very grateful to those of you present who have done so to your constituents, pass that message on. It means that I can get a better picture as to where we need to direct our resources. Now, figures, not great. Some of the good things that we're doing. One of the things that I was very passionate about when I came into post was re-engagement at every single level. And one of the things that we have done is gone out to every single school within Waverley and offered to re-engage, go and give an assembly, such like, because I think that's important. Being a parent of young children myself, I rued the day that the local schools officers were taken away. Again, it was a necessary move by the police, but over the last year, we've had roughly 2/3 of the schools respond, and we have had the opportunity to go and present, provide an assembly or a class, what the police do and how we do it, and age-specific topics of discussion, starting from let's climb in a police car to your 4-year-olds to let's try and tackle knife crime and drugs to your 16-year-olds. And this is a work in progress that will continue. In addition to that side of things, we have also looked at greater engagement with the community. Again, we have limited resources, so what we can do, we need to ensure is meaningful. Last night, I attended the Police Crime Commissioner's first roadshow engagement event around the increase in police precept, the Band D property providing an extra £24 a year. And at that, there was a commitment, once again, reiterated by the PCC, that he is looking to increase the neighbourhood teams by an extra 2 police officers to deal with the neighbourhood side of things and an extra youth intervention officer to try and tackle some of the issues that we are seeing with children. Now that will directly link into the problems that have been raised around Oxford Ridge. I'll be totally specific, that is the area that we have the biggest issue around antisocial behaviour within the borough. That's not to say it doesn't happen elsewhere, but that is one of the areas, or the area, where we see it concentrated. We're currently working with partner agencies through the Joint Action Group to try and alleviate some of the reasons that lead to the ASB. It's all very well the police being able to enforce or try and deal with the problem once it's occurred. Actually, we should be trying to prevent it occurring in the first place. And so over the last year, we have strengthened the working relationships that we have with all our partner agencies through the introduction of a SOC meeting, Serious Organised Crime, greater representation at our Joint Action Group to try and tackle some of the issues that we've faced. That's a very quick overview, and I'm more than happy in due course, when you so desire, Madam Chairman, to take any questions or discuss any points that you'd like.
Thank you very much. Questions, Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Not so much a question, more to say thank you to the Borough Commander for the help that he's given me in the last few months, particularly in relation to very troubled parking difficulties in my division. Also drug taking, there was a swift response, and I'm very grateful to his Sergeant Claire Sutherland, coming back to me last week on the subject of burglaries and so on and so forth in the area. and a swift response has been much appreciated. And indeed, one or two residents have come back to me to express their appreciation at some of the interventions that they have provided regarding difficult parking within the last few weeks. So I think when we engage with our local borough commander, he does react, and I have to say, very appreciative of that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'd also like to echo my thanks for how well your team and Claire Sutherland has dealt with antisocial behaviour in my division recently, which has been much appreciated. And again, I think the message of reporting these problems is, I think, getting through to the community, which hopefully is going to help catch some of these people. Mrs. Frost.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Like my colleagues, I'd like to echo my thanks to the police commander for everything they're doing. What I'm quite delighted about is that for some time we appear to be getting further away from the people we were looking after and representing, but we now seem to be getting much closer to them. And I know the people that I represent will appreciate that very much indeed. And I think there is a move to increase the PCSOs again, where at some point we were taking them away. And that caused a lot of angst amongst the local community. So thank you, particularly if that's what we're going to be doing. So can you confirm that? Thank you.
In relation to increasing the number of PCSOs, I am very keen to increase the size of my team, because the more people we've got, the more we can do to have an impact within the community that we police. The current vibe I am receiving from the senior management teams, the Chief Constable, the PCC, is that we will be looking at increasing the number of police officers. However, realistically, that will take a year by the time you've trained people and recruited, trained, and then placed people out onto the divisions. We do have a process at this moment in time where we are recruiting PCSOs. It may be that as an interim measure, we'll increase the numbers, but that's still a work in progress.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I too would like to thank you for what you're doing, but I think the process of where we were, the move from where we were before to where we are now has been really quite painful. And I think, you know, we certainly in my area have got used to the fact that there would be a police presence round sort of the Bourne Green where the kids used to gather, and they would move them on to Recreation where again they'd be sort of, you know, cajoled to moving. And there was a feeling on a Friday and a Saturday night that, you know, somebody was sort of vaguely around and in charge, and we never really had any huge difficulty with the young people. They're just doing most of them what young people do. They weren't drug taking, they were just sitting there and drinking and having the odd cigarette, and all things which I don't really condone, but, you know, they're young, for goodness sake. What we have now is a slightly different approach, but, you know, when we had a problem on the Bourne Green and we've got the police involved, and they're now going to do some extra sort of little patrols around there, and that's fine. But it's taken us a long time to realise that, you know, we had to be a little more active if we have an issue to get the police out. We did a litter pick in Paradise Wood, and in fact the local police did come out just to check that there hadn't been any drug taking there, and it wasn't, it was just a huge amount of litter. But, you know, I think from the public's point of view, it just seemed as though all policing had stopped. You know, they didn't see the police. The old PCSOs used to come along to garden parties, all sorts of things, just to be seen. And people felt that if they needed them, they were there. I know the police are still there, but I think perhaps it's communication. I think it's taken us some time to realise how to make you effective in our local communities in a way that we just, I suppose it was laziness. We didn't have to bother before because you were doing the work. But I hope we can, as we go forward, get some more local police, certainly, but also just explain to the public, you know, how quickly you can get responses and how to do that.
First and foremost, I'd thank everyone for your thanks. It's good to get feedback along those lines. In relation to the communication and the interaction, I think there was an ethos in 2016 when the Policing Your Neighbourhoods programme started that we needed to find our feet under that scheme. And there was a visible withdrawal of the police and the community interacting. I can only apologise for that side of things because that isn't something that I would have liked to have seen. You're right, I'm hopeful. In the last year, there has been an increase in the level of interaction, and there will continue to be so. I can't commit to attending every village fete or such like. We won't have a stall at every village fete, but what I will commit to is that the local officers will try and attend, even if it's for an hour or so, walk around, say hello, that side of things. I've also taken opportunities to go out on foot patrol. I don't get very far because the number of people that stop you and, oh, I haven't seen a police officer, and all of that side of things. But we are moving things forward. We've also increased the use of social media and have recently been approached by Farnham Rants, of which I'm sure many people are aware. 25,000 people following Farnham Rants. The administrators reached out to me. I followed it secretly, but they worked out who I was. And they basically said, can they do something to help? That has moved on from one of the administrators being not necessarily very pro, but he, last weekend, sent an application in to become a special constable. So we are out there, we are trying to make things better, and I'm open to any suggestions around how we can improve that moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Byam.
And just one thought, interesting, I mean, the problems of social media and the amount of reporting, I mean, and the Godalming, on the Godalming sites, which I view quite frequently, the tremendous amount of problem with vehicle crime, etc., etc. Trying to get advice out there to people on how to protect their vehicles as best they can, bearing in mind what's going on, is extremely interesting. Another problem that I found, I mean, one particular person in Bramley, and I can't go into any detail whatsoever about this, except to say that they've observed what they believe to be drug dealing in public car parks or whatever. Most of us miss all these things happening. You just don't know what's happening. A car may drive up. I don't know how they work. How do we get those people to be able to interact with the police so that you are able to engage and to see whether you are able to actually prosecute people or arrest people and prosecute them and deter them from working from those particular places?
There are various ways in which a person can contact the police via 101 or online, or if it's something happening directly, 999. In addition, you will see officers, whether it's a police constable or a PCSO, on patrol in the main towns and villages across the borough within the near future. So there will be an increase in opportunity to stop someone and talk directly. In addition, if there are any groups, and this is an open offer, any groups or meetings that you know of that you feel that there would be value in the police attending, please contact me. And if there's mutual value, we will attend, we will discuss, because it is important that we get out that information. We can't do anything if you don't tell us. We can't be everywhere, but we will be in as many places as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Seaborn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And thank you, Commander, for lots of positive messages. Last year, this borough experienced quite a large number of traveller incursions. Hopefully some lessons were learnt, and presumably the mobile travelling season is about to be upon us again. Can you comment on anything that was learnt during the frequent incursions, which by and large were well pleased and constructively pleased, and are there provisions made to learn from what we experienced last year? Thank you.
Firstly, I think last year we had fewer incursions than years previous, I believe. Certainly compared to other boroughs within Surrey, we had a lot fewer. It is, unauthorised incursions are, it's a topic that is regularly discussed. There are now official guidelines within the police service and within local councils as to how we will deal with those. My team in Waverley go a little bit beyond. In the first instance, most encampments occur on council-owned land, so the landowner would have to go out and make sure provisions are provided and such like. The police will also take on some of that responsibility. And I feel that last year we worked very well together in when we identified an incursion, an unauthorised encampment, it was dealt with as quickly as possible. It isn't an overnight solution. There are court processes which take a few days, but in every instance we were able to move people on. It would, I'll put out my plea because this may be the ears that I need to speak to, if there was a transit camp within Surrey, and I appreciate the pressures from that side of things, it would strengthen our arm even further. We see that Sussex have a transit site down in Chichester. They are able to progress things superbly. I would ask for that to be considered at every opportunity, and I appreciate the pressures of no one wanting it, but it would help us immensely.
Thank you. Mr. Martin.
Sorry, Madam Chair, there was one more thing that I meant to say. My apologies for coming back. The PCC roadshow last night, I'm sorry that many of us who would have liked to have been there couldn't. There was a full council meeting here at Godalming, so a number of us would have been there. It was not a lack of interest, and certainly we'll want to be present at future meetings.
In relation to that side of things, I'm hoping that I'll get the opportunity to write a column in the Farnham and Hazelmere Herald. It'll go out monthly, and that will be the first column next week. So not to give the paper a plug, please have a look and you'll see. It was very positive last night, I feel, and we got some valuable feedback from the community.
Thank you very much. Oh, Mr. Hyman.
Sorry, I thought you'd see me indicate some time ago. Yes, thank you to the Borough Commander. I would like to, I think, stress that when people are paying extra on their council tax bills and they're told that it's sort of heading in a particular direction, I think there's going to be a very strong public expectation to see these more feet on the ground in real terms. And I know how difficult that is. You may need 8 people in order to have 2 on the street at any one time because of shifts and all the rest of it. I'm not saying, you know, it's Bobby's on bicycles 2 by 2, isn't it? Is what people want to see in a way in our rural borough. It's not going to happen quite like that. But can you give us a realistic expectation for our residents as to how many extra, you know, how many extra you'll see in the town centre or wandering around the green at the in the Bourne or Upper Hale or wherever over time? The other thing I wanted to mention was the exclusion order that we had recently in respect of the Undercroft car park at Sainsbury's. I just wondered if you could update us slightly. I think you were away when that was happening, weren't you? So that was delegated to somebody else. Whether that problem has been solved. When I drove through in the early hours of the morning last Saturday night, there was a very large group of kids out by the road, actually, opposite the United Reformed Church, not in the Undercroft itself. But to some extent, I feel it would be better to have them in there in the Undercroft than anywhere else. So you know, I'm not entirely sure that I understood the purpose of how effective that exclusion order would have been. So that's really my question. The other thing, it would be useful on page 21 for the village idiots like myself who can't remember all the details. I'm not entirely sure where you've got the details of the different offences: domestic burglary, robbery, theft, handling, vehicle crime. I'm not entirely sure how you separate those things out, because obviously burglary is going to involve handling anyway, and theft is to do with vehicle crime, or most of it I would think is. So at some point, I don't want you to go through them now because we've got, you know, we'll be here all day, but if at some point we could have just a simple definition that we could refer to that tells us how things are counted, that might be more helpful to me. Thanks.
I'll try and remember each point in turn. Well, let's do it in reverse. In relation to the definitions, yeah, I can circulate that if you're happy to do so, and can do that within a few days from that side of things. The dispersal order that you discussed, just very quickly, a dispersal is a power that the police have where they can place a requirement upon people in a specified area for a period of up to 48 hours that they must leave and not return. It's at the discretion of the officer dealing as to whether or not a person is excluded from that area for the full 48 hours. It also gives the police the power to say you must go via such a route, so on and so forth. There are certain guidelines. It's quite a draconian power, I feel, to say you're not allowed in this area, and it's something we try to avoid using. However, during the recent half-term, there were groups of youths congregating in the car park, and after a couple of days of officers going and trying to engage and saying, come on, you need to stop acting in the way that you are, antisocial behaviour, it was felt by the duty officer at that time that a dispersal order was necessary. Now, a dispersal order can be put in place by anyone of the rank of inspector or above, and it can be put in instantaneously, which happened on this occasion. The problem has not gone away, and we did not anticipate that it would, in all fairness. It is one of the topics that's being discussed at the Joint Action Group with a view to trying to negate the necessity for youths, as it is predominantly, to congregate there. We do find that the car park in question, which is an enclosed car park in front of Sainsbury's on South Street, is a natural magnet for people because it's dry, it's out of sight and all that side of things. And what we found with that dispersal order in place was that the youths spread themselves out. Some went home, others went to various parks or such like nearby where you could see them. And I don't know, I sort of just about remember when I was a youth, if someone could see me, my behaviour was slightly different to if they couldn't. And I think that's what we saw there. So the problem was at least resolved on those occasions. We haven't seen it to the same extent, so there has not been another dispersal put in place at this time. But as I say, it's not gone away. I'm very much aware of that, and we are trying to work out solutions similar to Oxford Ridge to prevent it happening in the first place. The first point that you made was how soon are we going to see these extra bobbies on the beat? So the precept, the PCC indicated that he would be looking at 100 police officers, not PCSOs. It's a mix, so if you take the equivalent of 100 police officers. That has been quantified in that we will not lose 25 posts we were going to, and we will up our established numbers by 75 officers. It is still a work in progress. The ambition is that we will have an additional 22 neighbourhood officers, neighbourhood constables, and an additional 11 YIOs, youth intervention officers, and that our specialist teams along the lines of CID, SIU, who deal with some of the most horrific crimes, will be increased in number as well. As to a time frame, it takes a while to recruit, it takes a while to train, so realistically, that will be an ongoing process. I would imagine that we will see extra feet on the ground early 2020. So a year or so, I would imagine. Hopefully less than, but to be realistic, I think it is going to be a while.
Just very briefly, Mr. Hyman.
Just looking at the numbers there, so if we're going to have an increase of 75, 22 neighbourhood constables, 11 youth intervention officers, I think you said, so that's 33 of the 75, we've still got 40-something left. You say more CID. Would that be all the rest of them, the CID? I'm just concerned that the 22, that's across Surrey, not Waverley, isn't it? 22 isn't going to actually find as many people on the street, is it, when you look at the number of shifts to be covered and the rest of it? We've got to be realistic and we've got to set the expectations reasonably, I think. Is that correct?
Ultimately, the decision is the PCCs and the Chief Constables. Whilst I can put suggestions forward, it doesn't necessarily carry the weight that senior officers have. What I would say is an additional 22 beat officers, NSOs, is a doubling of what we've got at this moment in time. Each borough has 2 NSOs at the moment. If we double that, 100% uplift in staff, plus an additional YIO, that will give me the capability to have a dedicated officer for each of the main towns, Farnham, Cranley, Hazelmere, Godalming, and surrounding areas. 100% increased visibility. I'm welcoming that. I'll welcome any more that I can get as well, but I think it's a step in the right direction.
Thank you, Chairman. That sounds very good. I think people we'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Inspector Smith, for that. I think that's a very helpful clarification of actually putting some sort of context on those numbers, which perhaps don't sound so exciting, but actually doubling the numbers, real people in Waverley, is something to be pleased about, I think. Right. Thank you very much. We'll let you get back to your rest day. If, I don't know, do people want to speak to Inspector Smith afterwards? Because he's happy to hang around, but it is his rest day. Otherwise, I think I'll let him. Yeah, okay. Right, moving on to item 9, highways update. Over to you, Frank.
Yes, thank you. I have been meeting with most of you, not all of you, but most of you recently to go through the allocations for this year. That's the county members. You'll notice on the paper, paragraph 2.1.9, that, and you'll recall in previous years, and I'm sort of talking 4 or 5 years ago now, that the allocations for each individual committee was done a little bit more fairer than it has been done over recent years. It was carried out based on length of road, population, area, etc. And Waverley used to do very well. Over the last couple of years, unfortunately, with the budgets being the way they were, all the various 11 districts and boroughs all had exactly the same allocation. This year, you'll see from that table there that it has been calculated somewhat differently this financial year, and the 2 million pot that has been allocated to the 11 districts and boroughs has been allocated as shown there, so that each committee has been given a base figure of £100,000, and then the remaining 900 of the 2 million has been divided by the number of county councillors. And hence you'll see that Waverley there has this year a budget of £200,000. Additionally, I have shown in paragraph 2.1.10 how that then breaks down with the other budgets. So the committee have the £200,000 of capital. There is no revenue maintenance at all this financial year, and each member has again received £7,500 of revenue funds. It was due to be increased, and I think the paper this time last year said that the £7,500 was due to be £10,000 this year, but again, due to severe budgetary constraints, it has been agreed that the figure be replicated again. So the committee have an additional £67,500. And again, there in 2.1.10, I have shown what the 15% top slice of the parking surplus is to be. In the annexes, I've also attached the Section 106 figures, which was requested at previous meetings. They are the latest Section 106 amounts that are available. Each sheet does have headings at the top explaining exactly what each one is, because as you know, the Section 106 monies are not cash. They are funds that have been pre-allocated through the planning process, so have to be spent on those conditioned items. Any questions? Thank you.
Mr. Harmer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I'm raising this here because it's a matter of local public concern. And this is the the Section 106 monies arising from the former Weyburn Works in Shackleford Road, Elstead, which are to be allocated to, it says 15,000 for the real-time passenger information improvements on the bus route number 46. What do you get for 15,000? Do you know? Roughly? You get one machine or?
I honestly don't know. That, as I said, those figures there are what has been covered by our TDP colleagues.
Yeah.
So they have allocated that from the conditioned money, and passenger transport teams will attempt to do what they can with that funding allocated to them.
So the decision sits with the bus team?
In terms of how and
How it
what
gets
they
used.
best spend it on, yes.
Okay. How much flexibility is really the question they have? Because it has been argued that that money has to be spent in Shackleford Road, where the site was, and there's a case for spending, depending on what you can get for 15,000, it would be good to have one in the centre of Elstead, which is where they go to when they're coming back, if you see what I mean.
I imagine it depends on the exact drafting of the section 106.
I'll talk to Laurie. Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Spence.
Thank you, Chair. The mystery that is the highways budget, just as I think I've got my head round it, it changes again. I just find it amazing that there's a revenue maintenance budget of nothing. I mean, not a single penny. I mean, that's not really a very good way to run a railroad as far as I'm concerned. The other mysteries in it that I just wanted to ask something about is I keep being asked about Section 106 and being sent forms and asking is everything on it, and I keep saying this, that, or the other thing. The latest one is the traffic island in the Upper Hill Road, which we've looked at, and I got on to Richard Cooper straight away to try and get £50,000 for it out of something, and the only thing is the Folly Hill development, which we don't want, but it's going to go ahead. So it may at least pay £50,000 for some socially useful cause. I've spoken to Richard about that. I was sent a form and asked for that to go on a list, but I don't see it on the list here. So one question would be, why is that not on the list? Is that not the complete process of cementing that 50,000? Is there something else I have to do to cement it? And the second question I want to ask, because I'll deal with some others offline, is the parking surplus. I can never get my head around why 15% seems to be taken off and given across the board, because the majority of that money is generated in Farnham. So I'm not completely convinced the largesse of Farnham should extend to giving everyone 15% of the money that's generated in our town. But when it's divided down last year, £8,666 per councillor, I managed to go through the list of getting all the other money spent. But every time I tried to get some of that spent, like the latest one is, can I spend it on street trees in South Avenue now that we've done West Avenue? The answer comes back, well, yes, you can, but there never seems to be a mechanism about how do I push the button to get that money to buy the trees. So if you could answer those three, why is my 50,000 from Folly Hill not on the list? How do I get the trees? Because I have some money left, but I don't know the mechanism to do it. And even I've forgotten what the third one was.
Yes, thank you. The Folly Hill, that list I've been given was the latest from the TDP, from Richard Cooper. So I will give that information back to him. He has obviously either omitted it from the list or it has not made that list yet. But I will inform him of that £50,000 on Folly Hill. The trees, Adrian?
So the trees, I believe the local highway officer is working with Farnham Town Council to work on this project for you.
So if I've got money left, that can happen, yeah?
Correct.
Marvellous, thank you.
And the 15%, fortunately or unfortunately, is not my call. It was agreed by this committee in September last year, and I'll leave it up to you to debate.
Mr. MacLeod.
If I can comment on this, like Wyatt and Stephen, I was equally concerned about this 15%, because it seemed to me if 15% was taken out of the whole fund every year, we'd fairly quickly reach the point where the 15% equated to the amount of money coming in that year, and the fund would never increase. So I spent time with Frank and his team yesterday trying to understand this, and if you look at the table on 2.1.12, you'll actually see that, in fact, there are two parts to this fund. One is the Farnham Fund, and one is the fund for the rest of the members, the 6 non-Farnham members. And they're treated quite separately, in fact. The 15% is simply a calculation, but the money is actually taken out separately out of the Farnham Fund and out of the other Waverley Members Fund. And in that sense, it's not unfair to Farnham. and that Farnham has got a much larger fund that is actually growing. The rest of the borough has a smaller fund that's actually declining. For example, the latest year, 51,000 was taken out of the fund and only 33,000 is added. In fact, within 2 or 3 years, the rest of the borough will not be able to have 8,000 or whatever it is, because they'll only be able to spend the money that comes in that year, which if it carries on at the present level would be 5,600. So the system is actually fair. The only thing that I would like confirmation of is that the money is allocated to Farnham and to the rest of the borough on a 72%, 28% ratio. That was established some time ago. Is that still the case? And I intend to check that with the guy who actually deals with it and puts the money into these separate pots. The system is actually fair. It's not unfair in the way I thought it was. It's just slightly difficult to understand. You need to sit down with Frank and his team for an hour or two to actually understand it. But I do now understand it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that clarification. Frank, could you just remind me again, because I'm no mathematician, I've never made an accountant. At 2.1.11, the difference, what is this 72% to 28%?
When the agreement was made in September of last year to take 15% top slice from the fund, it was also agreed to continue topping up the fund as it was on its previous ratios of what Farnham received compared with everyone else, which at the time was 72 to 28%. So that calculation has continued to be applied.
Mrs. Frost.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Chairman. I want to talk about the parking money, as you can imagine. The last meeting I attended before I went on sick leave was the September meeting, when I did not agree and I did not vote in favour of this 15%, because Farnham was the only town, apart from a few in Hazelmere, that agreed to put parking meters on the streets where appropriate. And therefore, it was the only way it was going to get money for Farnham roads and Farnham developments, and particularly the town centre development. I took great exception then, and I do now, that because none of the other areas looked to the future and decided where they could actually put parking meters to generate this money, that in fact 15% should be taken off the Farnham parking monies to go elsewhere within the borough. And I do feel very strongly about it. I felt strongly about it then, and I feel strongly about it now. We sort of bit the bullet and decided to go along this because we recognise that the only way that we were going to get money was to go down this route. And we had a public meeting of people in Farnham to actually tell them why we were doing it and what we were doing. And then suddenly we get new councillors joining us at the September meeting. Before I know where we are, they're all voting, oh, you can't have all this money, Farnham, we want some of it. Well, put some parking meters in and you'll get some. So I'm terribly sorry, but when we come to the recommendations, and I don't know which recommendation it's going to be, but I cannot vote for the 15% being top sliced and going to the rest of the borough. I just feel so strongly about it.
Thank you, Mrs. Coburn.
Well, I couldn't agree more with Mrs. Frost, and said so in not this chamber, but certainly at a meeting of this committee. It was a highly contentious matter to put any street furniture in the conservation area. We discussed it, as Councillor Frost said. We had public meetings. I was really worried about the street furniture as somebody who masterminded the Farnham Conservation Area Management Plan, where the majority of these, if not all, these meters had to go. I was really worried about the effect on the character of the conservation area. And I remember with Mrs. Frost, we had endless debates about how we could put them in and making them less obtrusive. And the whole thing was a big issue in Farnham. And we did tell the residents of Farnham that they were agreeing to this, and say jeopardising their conservation area. We did make sure that the furniture was acceptable. But it was a big decision for Farnham, and we took it having told residents that the money would come to them to improve our roads. And I'm sure roads elsewhere are equally as bad, but if you haven't driven through the borough recently, I mean, you haven't really experienced anything. It's a fairground ride all of its own, really. And, you know, I just feel, I'm like Mrs. Foster on this, I feel so strongly because I feel we moved the goalpost, having told the residents what we were doing, having struggled to find suitable street furniture, and we, as Councillor Frost, I think you used the phrase, well, I'll use it now, bit the bullet and went ahead with it. And I'm with her. I think we've cheated the residents of Farnham on this one.
Thank you. Mr. Martin.
Thank you. It's a pity we have to revisit this yet again. We had a very thorough discussion about this last year. I feel very strongly the other way. I feel that the Farnham is the largest settlement, largest town in the borough. It attracts a large number of people from not just Farnham. It attracts people from a great distance around. And I think we felt that there was a fairness in saying that, therefore, a proportion of that money, which is going to be paid not only by those who live in Farnham, but those who live at a wider level, more widely dispersed, should come back to those people. And in fact, although they talk about 15%, the 15% goes back to all 9 councillors, and therefore, in effect, it's 10% that is lost to Farnham. So five of that 15% stays with Farnham. So in effect, it's not 15% going out, it's 10%. That seems to me a bit low, and maybe there's a strong case for making that bigger. But I wouldn't want to stir the pot too much in that direction, and I'd be very content to maintain the status quo. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. MacLeod.
Can I say, Chairman, I obviously haven't explained myself well enough. If people look at the table on 2.1.12, they'll actually see that the money that came out of the Farnham Fund is the money that it was given to the 3 Farnham councillors, 25,998. The money that came out of the rest of the borough's fund was the 6 times 8,808, which is 51,000. Farnham didn't lose out. Farnham actually only lost the money that went to the Farnham councillors. The rest of the borough lost the money that went to the rest of the borough councillors. And that comes from the fact that 28% of this money is regarded as being raised in the rest of the borough, if that is actually true, and 72% is raised in Farnham. And they're treated quite separately. I obviously haven't explained myself, but it's quite simple if you take the time to understand the table on 2.1.12. There's nothing unfair about it. It doesn't mean that money's been taken away from Farnham and given to the rest of the borough, because it's treated quite separately.
Thank you for that explanation. Mr. Harmer, I think you wanted to speak.
Yes. The villages I represent, half of them, spend their time going to Farnham to shop and do all these things, and they pay the money that generates many of these things. A fair proportion. Obviously, people in Farnham walk to the shops and walk to the other events because they're very conscious of the need to cut down the pollution within Farnham, etc., etc. So you really don't want the people from the villages to come into Farnham? Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're telling me? And we put it from where? From my... No, they don't. They go to Farnham. Then adjacent to Farnham, in fact, I'm surprised you haven't proposed increasing the boundaries of Farnham to enclose 2 of them, possibly 3. Some of the villages would be delighted to put a heavy-duty set of parking meters around the places where Farnham people like to come in order to relax.
Do it. Yeah.
I think there would be absolute uproar all over the place if we did that.
But you do.
Now, I'm not going to propose that because I think it would be absolutely outrageous. There's no point in Waverley saying that it's a beautiful place to be if we then go and wreck it with parking meters in the beautiful places. Ditto the county council making the same sort of noises to justify all sorts of things. So it seemed to me that it was perfectly reasonable to argue that as a trade between the people going from the villages into the town and the people from the town coming out to relax into the villages, that there should be a contribution arising from the profitability, rather than surplus, isn't it, of the parking regime, to be spent on the roads. Otherwise, to be quite honest, a number of those facilities road facilities would break down because they would be not sustainable with the amount of traffic that comes in those directions. So for that reason, that was the reason why I was in favour of these arrangements, because it seemed to me to be an equitable arrangement between town and country. Those of you who are Waverley members may remember that the slogan is Oppida Rusque something or other. And, and that means town and country together. And it would be a good idea if, in my view, and I have a little bit of urban, a couple of square miles out of the 35, which in fact is more than half of my electorate, so I do have a bit of urban. I do think it's right that there should be a relationship between town and country, and this is a good example of it.
Thank you. Mr. Ramsdale.
Thank you, Chairman. And I find myself agreeing with a lot of what's been said. I just think the maths are wrong. I hear what Councillor MacLeod's been said, has said. Andy, I think you're making a few mistakes here. To me, it's quite simple. I think we agreed that 15% was the amount of money, percentage of the amount of money being collected that was being collected from fines rather than from parking. And therefore it was well, to me it was the 15% that was logical, therefore, to share across the entirety of Waverley. Whereas the parking money, which as Councillor Frost explained and Councillor Coburn's backed up on, is almost entirely parking meters in Farnham. And then for the 85% should be retained by Farnham. Indeed, the plan is that it's spent in Farnham. And of course, it's collected in Farnham, spent in Farnham. Whether the person that comes in from Frensham Village to park and use it, nobody minds, or indeed elsewhere in all of Waverley. So to me, the 15% is fine. But the 15% should only be of each year's money. Top Slice takes a slice of all that's been accumulated. And that part of the calculation was wrong. It was right the very first time we did it, because the very first time it was a number of years of accumulated funds that we were deciding what to do with. So to me, it's a case of spending the 85% where it was raised, which is in Farnham, and spending Farnham's slice of the 15%, because, would you believe it, although I'd love to be told differently, that there are people who commit offences in Farnham as well as elsewhere in Waverley. But that isn't what these maths do, and that this maths is wrong in the way it uses the top slice. It's wrong in the way that it allocates to the buckets. It might be right in the way that Councillor MacLeod said that it takes the money out of specific buckets, but the amount going in to the individual members from the 15% should only be about £2,000, which would leave, if you keep spending at £9,000, no money left in the non-Farnham bucket. And per my projections, that's not how this will work out. So if we want to have a Farnham that's developed, the funds used from the parking, as was intended, to keep Farnham looking nice and attractive for people from Frensham and further afield to come and visit, we've got to change this maths. That's where I stand.
Mr. MacLeod. Yeah.
The 15% is simply a number for calculation. It's not, it doesn't, where the money goes, it's got nothing to do with the 15%. The money is allocated on the 72%, 28% basis. That 72% of the money comes to Farnham and 28% goes to the rest of the borough. And that's based on the fact that 28% is raised on parking fines elsewhere in the borough. That's where the money is at. The money that comes into the fund goes in on the 72%, 28% basis, and the fund builds up on that basis. If that ratio is correct, and where the money is derived, that is correct. In terms of the money coming out, once the 15% has been calculated, it's only the money for the 3 Farnham members that comes out of the Farnham part of the fund. The money from the... tell you, if I believe Farnham has been cheated, I'd be the very first to say so. But the money for the rest of the borough comes out of the rest of the borough's part of the fund. There's 2 actually quite separate pots here, a Farnham pot and the rest of the borough pot. The Farnham pot is increasing, the rest of the borough pot is reducing, because the members elsewhere in the borough are taking more out than is going in. And the whole, if people took the trouble to understand the calculation, they would actually see that it is perfectly fair. And the only thing that needs to be questioned is whether the 72%, 28% ratio is correct. Other than that, there's nothing wrong with this calculation. I don't know if Frank wants to defend himself, because he's the guy who's drawn this basis up. But I spent quite a lot of time with Frank yesterday, and I'm satisfied that the thing is correct. And I wouldn't be satisfied if I thought it was unfair to Farnham. The 15% does not come out of the Farnham fund. It comes out, 1/3 of it comes out of the Farnham fund, 2/3 of it comes out of the fund for the rest of the borough. And that is reducing, and it will disappear fairly soon, whereas the Farnham fund will keep increasing. It's actually quite simple if you take the trouble to understand it. Sorry, Chairman.
The figures in there, if you sort of look at the 2017-18 figures, they are, as Councillor MacLeod has correctly said, they are the figures that were agreed following that September committee. So all I have done is apply the percentage to those amounts, because my understanding was at that meeting that the 15% top slice, the original intention of that 15% top slice, was to enable this committee to pursue schemes from its ITS list, which were of a reasonable amount of money, that they couldn't otherwise do with the funding that was available to them. So by top slicing that 15%, it enabled them to carry out locally important schemes that were of a significant amount of money, such as the petition or whatever we've had this morning. I understand Councillor Ramsdale's argument, but if you were to use that argument and only top slice, and in the 2018-19 figures where the surplus has been £200,000, but the committee then receive 60% of that, which is 120,000. If you were to apply 15% to that, it would only be £18,000. That would not be sufficient for the original intention, which is to spend that money on a significant scheme. So we've got to bear in mind that the original intention of that 15% was to spend it in that fashion. Unfortunately, subsequent years, the committee has decided that that money be divided up 9 ways, and that original intention has been lost.
Mr. Martin.
I'm not an expert on all the maths, but when I add up the 18-19 figures, you get 463,000 spread between 3 Farnham members and 89,000 spread between 6 other members. So it's a pretty enormous, rightly so, focus on Farnham there. I would propose that we do not make any changes and we move on.
Okay, well, clearly we've got quite a range of different views. I feel like I might be like Theresa May trying to find the way through Brexit. I don't want to have to go through indicative votes, but I would just like to start. Could I have a show of hands, all those in favour of keeping the current arrangements as they are? Thank you. And then all those against? Thank you. And any abstentions? Thank you very much. Well, I think on that basis, we continue with the figures as we currently have them set out. Does anybody have any further questions on the report or on specific matters in their areas? Mr. Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just as an addendum to last vote, I think that the rest of the borough should be looking at having machines put in so that we're getting more money for the whole of the borough. I think that's the solution, to get more in rather than to spend forever, because it's not a massive amount of money, even though I do feel that it's not entirely fair that Farnham's the only place that does have this street furniture, and other places that don't want it. So anyway, let's move on. I want to just check that para 242 on page 30 refers to the wrong years. Is that the case? I'm happy if that's a typo. I'm not entirely, otherwise I don't understand. Should be 1920, should it? For members will be sent. Yeah. The top of page 31, Farnham redevelopment works. Well, I won't go into that in detail, but it does come up on page 47, I think it is, page 47, the top, under money secured by Section 106 agreement, but not yet paid to Surrey County Council. We've got £275,000 for a park and stride walk scheme for Farnham Town Centre and £100,000 for traffic reduction contribution. It states here to be paid in phases during the construction of the development, first payments due on commencement of the development, and it says at the top, development commenced in August 2018. And I'm wondering, I'm not blaming anybody here, I'm just asking, obviously, the question, have we received this money? I actually thought that in the contract, and I knew this like the back of my hand a few years ago, but it's possible the contract was changed when it was signed. That money for the park and stride, I think, was meant to be paid 6 months before the commencement. There was I don't know how you track that, but there was something in the Section 106 agreement there. Now, the problem with this that I see is that it appears to me that, regardless of what Councillor Frost says, and I don't doubt that she was shown some modelling at the task group of 2 or 3 years ago, but that modelling did not actually include the modelling that Crest had done of the junction in 2007, that didn't actually model what they proposed, and that's the whole point. Now, in 2013, the Surrey County Highways planning people were meeting in a task group with others, and they said that this scheme, Crest's scheme, the pedestrianisation is not...
I think we're going back down the route.
No,
We've been
look,
over this already.
This is actually really important to us, and it's happening this summer. So if you wouldn't mind, Chairman, it is something that needs to be addressed seriously.
Madam, on point of order, is it relevant to item 9?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. The issue is that if this, you see, what Crest Nicholson were putting in this, under what's at the top of that table, they were going to be pedestrianising East Street, and on top, because that was going to cost them a load of money, on top of that, they were going to be putting in the park and stride and a contribution to reduction. But if they're not going to be putting in the pedestrianisation, Farnham will be getting virtually nothing out of that development. And so what we need to be looking at Surrey is how we...
No, I'm afraid, Mr Hyman, this is not related to the highways update. This is, entirely off subject on a planning matter that is unrelated to this committee. This is not our place to consider it.
It's Surrey Highways. We're always told that we can't approach this at all because it's a planning matter, but it's Surrey Highways who have to agree this. Now, we've had fantastic...
Madam Chairman, I think it's point of order. I do think that we should stop this. It's not relevant to this.
Well, how do we get a solution if we're not allowed to discuss it anywhere, Chairman?
It is not part of item 9 as we have it set out here. It's not relevant to this to item 9 discussions. Thank you.
Can I just on that ask the question, have we received this money? And if not, why not? And what's been done about it?
We will ask Richard Cooper whether this money has been received or not. And then we will let you know, and that's fine. Mr Spence.
Thank you. I've just got one comment. It is on the Crest Nicholson and Berkeley Homes issue, because Highways, as I understand it, tried to get Crest Nicholson to allow Berkeley Homes, who are doing the Woolmead development, to use their bridge that they've built onto the bypass rather than take the trucks out on the Hill Road. And my understanding is neither Surrey Highways nor through Waverley, who deal with the planning, can the refusal of Crest Nicholson to allow Berkeley Homes to use their bridge be challenged. And what I would like to ask, and it's a bit of a question that I probably know the answer to, but I think it needs to be heard publicly, is why do we seem not to have the power to make a developer, particularly a developer that we are investing with very strongly, do something that's very reasonable and sensible to save the traffic on Hill Road when there's a bridge to take big trucks out onto the bypass?
Again, Mr Spence, this is a planning matter and we're not here to discuss planning matters. It is not within our remit. I'm sorry.
So Surrey Highways have... Can I just confirm what your ruling is? That Surrey Highways have got no control over highways. Is that correct?
No, I'm saying that it is a planning matter and Surrey Highways do not have control over planning matters and that this committee does not consider planning matters.
Madam Chairman, can I just endorse that? So I think Mr Spence needs to go to Waverley Planning to take that up. It's not an issue for this committee. And there is a planning condition, as far as I understand it, the bridge is for Crest Nicholson. That's a planning condition. If that wants to be changed, that has to go through Waverley Planning and then would come back to planning. It's not a local committee issue at all.
Chairman, could I explain a little bit more? The department called Transportation Development Control at Surrey is a planning department which has highways specialisms and gives advice to the 11 districts and boroughs. But it is advice. Generally speaking, the planning authorities don't ignore it because it would be too easy to appeal against failure to recognise the advice they'd received. But it is not in the remit of, it's absolutely nothing to do with our highways department. It's a planning issue at both levels, district and county.
Well, they've ignored the advice on this occasion, and the answer seems to be there's nothing that Surrey Highways can do about that, which seems rather odd to me, but I'll take the answer.
Right, thank you. I think we should now move to the recommendations, please. So on page 25, first of all, to note the committee approved allocations and works progressed during 2018-19. Is that approved? To note the committee devolved budget allocation. To agree the recommendations made in this report for utilising the available highways budget for 2019-20. And to delegate to the area highway manager, etc., to resolve any problems. Thank you very much. Right, we now move to item 10, which is the Hindhead Road speed limit reduction, which is just an item for a decision. You'll have had the papers and read them. We do have Duncan Knox here. Does anybody have any questions on this report? Perhaps Mr Harmer, as it's in your division.
It isn't. It isn't, but I have told Haslemere Town Council that during the interregnum period, the member for Haslemere having resigned, that I will deal with matters on their behalf if they will act as a filter for them, so I don't get 10 minutes. But I was going to say, I think the ward member is here, and maybe I'd like to hear if he... I agree with it, okay? I've said for a long time that I thought that the part that was 40 could be 50, the part that 50 ought to be 40, absolutely.
Mr Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I agree with that. Personally, I've used the road for many years, and with the amount of traffic now using that road, it would be wise to reduce the speed limit to 40. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Mrs Coburn.
Yes, I just wanted to concur. For several years, I used to use that cut through from Hindhead Quarters. It's listed there onto this road, and it was always the nightmare of the day, really, was moving between the two sites, because coming out of Nutcombe Lane, I mean, you had no idea what was going to hurtle towards you, but you could bet your life it was going fast. And, you know, I think this is eminently sensible. I just hope again that people take note of it. Thank you.
Thank you. So the recommendations on page 59, are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. We now move to the decision tracker on page 67. Do I have any comments on page 67? '68. Okay, take it that that's all agreed then. The forward programme, page 69, we've already said that we're going to have the Cabinet Member for Highways. Does anybody have any comments on this? Yes, Mr Hyman.
Well, I look at this list here, and and it's fairly obvious to me that this committee isn't only about highways. It includes the economic strategy and police, obviously, and a number of other things. And is it possible for us to have the Surrey planning team come to here, please, so that we can address the issues which are actually more, need to be tied in with everything else that we do? Is it possible for us to get them along so that we can address the issues that are very important to the main town in this borough, and which?
I do appreciate that you do have concerns about the planning system, but the planning system is governed by Waverley Borough Council, and this is a Surrey County Council committee, and we do not have jurisdiction
but Surrey County
over
Council
planning
does
matters.
have we've just been talking about it.
We're consultees. Yeah, we're consultees. So is Southern Water. So is South East. I mean, we're not much better than them, except that these people are specialists in highways.
Yes,
That's
but
all.
they do the modelling, they do all the and are responsible for a lot of the decisions we make, in as much as we can never go against what is being said, and all those decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Hyman. I take I understand your views, but I'm afraid the fact is that we cannot discuss planning matters here. Mrs. Coburn.
I just wanted to endorse what you've just said. When we are dealing with planning matters, we can ask the Surrey team to come and speak to us, and in fact they do frequently, especially when we have a difficult issue, and that's the forum. As you say, this is not a forum for planning, and end of the story, really. It should just not go on the programme.
Dr. Povey.
I think I'd take a slightly more nuanced view, Chairman, that transportation development control, which whilst it is part of the planning function of the County Council, has a significant input into this area in all sorts of planning applications, etc. And I don't see why, as a local committee, we couldn't invite them along to tell us a little bit about the policies of which they work to, etc. And we might then be able to influence them to the good for this area.
Well, I mean, you'll recall, Dr. Povey, that Paul Drews has been to our informal meetings in the past, and we can certainly have him again. I agree that,
I was thinking more of Richard Cooper or something like that.
Okay. Mrs. Frost.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Again, I think we're going round in ever-decreasing circles. I agree with you. This is not a committee at which we should be discussing planning matters, and I think if there are members who wish the development control team from Surrey County Council to come and give them some training in what they do, then I suggest they do it through Waverley Borough Council and have it before a committee meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Martin.
I think it's important that we ensure that we don't try and reopen planning decisions that have already been taken. And this is not a remit for this committee. I think if we want an explanation of what they do, that's fine. We may have some challenges during the course of planning applications. I frequently speak to the TDC and have influenced, or I've tried to influence their decisions. I've sometimes been very annoyed and very frustrated by them. However, once the decision has been taken, it's not right and relevant that we, in a committee of this sort, that we try and get them back in to reopen the decision. And that is not appropriate, and it's absolutely out of order as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. So on that note, if anybody has any other ideas for items they'd like on the future agenda, please let me know. Wyatt. Mr. Ramsdale.
Thank you, Chairman. Just reflecting back on some of the discussion we had earlier, and in particular the item concerning a Waverley local committee or a joint committee, something I'd really appreciate is if Guildford have got to what some describe as a really good joint committee, it's some education processes to tell us how the two differ. how it would work differently. Perhaps an explanation of what Guildford do, maybe with one of our officers drawing some comparisons and what the changes might be. So not a formal decision making, we are going to do that, but an explanation of what the difference is between the two and why there might be pros and cons. Thank you.
Thank you, that's noted, and we'll look at that maybe for a future informal to get some information on that to come forward. Thank you very much. The date of the next meeting is Friday the 28th of June, back here at 10 a.m. as normal, and I declare the meeting closed and thank members, residents and officers for attending. Thank you.